My neighbors are screaming, and I'm gonna go check on them, so I have to leave. I will try to come back.
Okay, I hope it's nothing major.
Yeah.
Okay. Based on what I've seen in the chat, it looks like most, if not everybody, has found the lizard. If you didn't, it's right here on the log. I was kind of hoping you'd all be distracted by the giraffes in the background. Okay, announcements. Same as they were last time. Everything that was assigned over spring break is due this Friday. So it's a review quiz and a short answer questions. You also need to, if you have not yet, submit your project topic request and your project format request. So the format is, are you doing a presentation? Are you writing a paper? Are you performing an original song, creating a TikTok video? I'm very flexible about how you present the information that you've learned. There will be new assignments, hopefully posted tomorrow. There will be a quiz and a short answer as usual. And yes, I did not correct the 9 to a P in posted. The new assignments will be due Friday, March 31st. And the project itself is going to be due Sunday, April 16th. So there's about 3 weeks before that's due. Okay, when we were last talking, we were starting to talk about sexual selection, which is a different kind of evolution. We tend to think of natural selection, where we have reinforcing pressures that select from the diversity within a species, and they select for those that are most fit, i.e., the ones that survive and reproduce. Evolution doesn't care about you except in terms of reproduction. So you can have a lot of health problems, you can die young, but if you reproduced, evolution doesn't care. Which is why we have a lot of diseases that strike us later in life when we're past our peak reproductive period. Okay, so when we talk about sexual selection, we see the sexual dimorphism. I think we talked about this last time. Usually the males are the more colorful ones. They sing, they display, they're trying to attract the female. There is a risk that they will attract a predator while they're doing this. Obviously, if these two birds were in a tree and a predator comes along, it's going to go after the male. But in some systems, the female will be more colorful. It really depends on how that species finds mates and who does the parental care. So in species where the female sits on the nest, she tends to be drabber. In species where both male and female sit on the eggs while they're incubating, there tends to be more similar coloration. Notice in cardinals, the female, based on what I'm just describing to you, the female probably sits on the eggs, but the male will bring her food, and once the babies are born, both parents will participate. In most systems, fewer males get the opportunity to reproduce. But those that do produce large numbers of offspring over their lifetime. In most systems, females are more likely to reproduce, but have fewer offspring over their lifespan. So there's this tug between wanting to have a lot of male offspring because they have more grandchildren and wanting to have more female offspring because they're more likely to have grandchildren. All right, so when we look at sexual selection, when we have a situation where the female does basically all of the child care, we tend to get more extreme characteristics in the males, more extreme colors, more extreme behaviors, more things designed to attract the female's attention. It's all look at me, look at me, look at me. The males that survive with these traits, they got to be fit. If I can avoid a predator, my offspring are going to be fit and they're going to be able to avoid predators and attract a mate. That's what this message is sending. It's not I'm being flashy, it's I'm fit, I'm healthy, I'm successful, and you want to have your offspring have my genes. And we can often see these traits become more and more extreme over time. The males get more colorful, louder, they get these elaborate feathers, all of this stuff, because the female will go, okay, well, you've got this beautiful red back and this flashy yellow and blue on your feathers, but this other guy, he's got even more red. He's got even more flashy colors, which means he's probably fitter. He's had to work harder to be still alive and successful. So I'm going to mate with the more extreme male. This progression to these more and more extreme characteristics goes until the increased mating opportunities is balanced by the lower survival rate. So the same things that are attracting, I've said this like 3 times today, the same things that are attracting the females are attracting predators. And once the survival rate drops, then no amount of selection will reinforce that trait and make it go even more extreme. If we think about peacocks, the males have these massive tails. Those tails make it hard for these birds to fly and hard for them to get away from predators. So it takes more effort for them to get off the ground. They're going to be slower to get off the ground. Predators can grab those tail feathers. So all of these things are going on. If the tails get too big and the males can't fly at all, none of them are going to survive. So there's going to have to be a balance. And I'm going to click on this link over here. And I know it takes a second of maneuvering for me to take you with me. So I'm going to pause the video. Let me know if you can't see or hear.
They go from expected to extraordinary in the blink of an eye.
You're awestricken. They transform themselves to something that you've never seen before.
They swagger and serenade. They dance and display. They're unlike any creatures on Earth, and one of the most astounding phenomena ever witnessed. The birds of paradise. Found here in the nearly impenetrable mountains and valleys of the island of New Guinea, in the greatest remaining tract of rainforest in the entire Asia-Pacific region. They exist nowhere else on Earth.
The vast majority of the land around here has no road access. You're just looking up into a wall of steep slope, and you can tell that this is just ridge after ridge and valley after valley.
Evolutionary biologist Ed Scholes and wildlife photographer Tim Lehman have spent the better part of a decade trekking into this isolated wilderness in pursuit of all 39 species of these miraculous birds.
Well, the only way to see a kingbird of paradise is to climb up into the trees where they live. So I'm heading up to my platform.
They've been photographing, analyzing, and recording their every move, every behavior, in an attempt to comprehend their secrets. And in doing so, revealing extreme examples of the miracle of evolution.
The birds of paradise represent one of these singular events of evolution that stand out, that are extraordinary. They're something that's without precedent, something that evolved that's so unique and so exceptional that you're driven to say, why, or how did that happen? How did that come to be?
The birds of paradise are remarkable not only for their exceptional beauty and almost otherworldly appearance, but as veritable living textbooks on adaptation and sexual selection.
The females are looking at this whole package and can discern something about him by minor variation. The more complex it is, the harder it is to make it look right. If one little feature is out of whack, you're going to be able to tell.
What about New Guinea has led to these birds evolving here and nowhere else? What function do their outrageous plumes and ornaments play? And what exactly are they doing?
For me, it still always goes back to the original driving question, and that's, how did it happen? How did the birds of paradise come to be?
Witness diverse strategies of evolution at work, and experience one of nature's most extraordinary hidden wonders up close. A world where beauty and behavior are intertwined. A spectacle not possible any other place on Earth.
Okay, any comments or thoughts on that video? Nothing. You guys are quiet today. Can somebody just put like a, we're still here in the chat? Okay, thank you, Anna. Yeah, I just show that little snippet to give you guys a glimpse of the diversity that can arise from sexual selection. So that was kind of the quick introduction to evolution, specifically sexual selection, because it's something that when we first learn evolution, we tend to learn natural selection only, but that's not the only way evolution works. So now what I want to do is I want to spend some time talking specifically about going from the theropod dinosaurs, a certain group of dinosaurs, to the modern birds. So what makes a bird a bird? This goes way back to the beginning of the semester when I defined bird for you. But what makes them birds? Endothermic. Yeah, good, Laura. Endothermic, absolutely. Feathers, wings, the wishbone or furcula, and relatively large brains. Yeah, hard-shelled eggs. Good. So these are all things that we think of when we think about the birds. And of course, relatively large brains, we have to put a little asterisk because we have to exclude the ratites because, you know, emus, ostriches, not very bright. So that's where we are today. Where did we come from? So if we look at the ancestry of birds, we can go back to what we call the theropod dinosaurs, which first appeared around 230 million years ago, MYA, million years ago, in what we call the Triassic period. And so back here in the Triassic, the theropod dinosaurs were characterized by standing on their hind legs, so they were bipedal. We're going to get into the exact characteristics in the next slide, but bipedal is certainly one of the first things that we notice here. And this is about the time the lineage of birds, the ancestors of birds and crocodiles split. So before this time, we had common ancestors between birds and crocodiles, and now we don't anymore. This group is a group that we tend to know really well because, you know, some of the more charismatic, some of the more interesting in terms of pop culture dinosaurs were the theropod dinosaurs. So Tyrannosaurus Rex and the Velociraptors. Now I'm going to disappoint you guys. Velociraptors were about the size of a turkey. And as far as we can tell, they did not hunt in packs, and they were desert or dry scrubland dwellers, not tropical forest species. And of course, they had feathers. Yes, Daniel, you're right. They were actually, they called them velociraptors, but they were more modeled on Utah raptors. Absolutely. So this is a lineage that kind of shows where the basal or the last common ancestor between the later theropod dinosaurs and the birds split off. And you can see birds progressed in one lineage to become more and more bird-like until we now have modern birds. And the other lineage produced the raptors and the tyrannosaurs. So tyrannosaurs, raptors are not ancestors to birds, but they're cousins to birds. So hang on a second, let me check something. Okay, I'm on the right slide. So when we look at the relationship between all of these organisms, we start out with the group called archosaurs. Archosaurs include birds, crocodiles, but not other reptiles, just the crocodiles and the theropod dinosaurs. And the theropod dinosaurs, we start to see things like bipedal locomotion. So they walked on their hind legs. Bi means two, pedal refers to feet. They walked on 2 feet. Their front legs did make some changes. They were modified to help grasp and tear at prey, because they were pretty much predominantly carnivores. These theropod dinosaurs were not particularly smart. So the theropods until they evolved into true birds. So the velociraptor had a skull about the size of a coyote skull, but had a brain about the size of a pigeon brain. Yeah, we know bigger brains means, when you compare it to the body mass, means more intelligence. As a group, most of the theropods were pretty big. So they were between 100 and 500 pounds on average. Now, I'm going to give you another little asterisk here, because this is based on the theropods that we have fossils for. Fossilization is a rare process. So most individuals who die do not leave fossils. Smaller animals, even if they left fossils, the fossils are more likely to be damaged over the millions of years in the ground. They're harder to find because they're smaller. It's easy to find a bone from a T-Rex. It's very hard to find a bird from something the size of a sparrow. So our view of the dinosaurs is skewed. So we have this view of them as large, and we're probably missing a whole bunch of diversity in the smaller ones. We're also missing diversity based on where they lived, because not every place had the conditions needed to form fossils, but that's a whole nother story here. So how did we go from giant predators to tiny seed-eating sparrows? The earliest ideas about bird evolution were that there must have been several major evolutionary leaps with large-scale changes in the genes. But it's not clear that that is the case anymore. The idea was, if you look at the fossil record, when we were first thinking about this, there was a period where suddenly it seemed like there were fully modern birds in the fossil records. This was before the 1990s. And at that time, the only fossil that we knew of that had feathers was Archaeopteryx. So it's spelled right here for you. So this is Archaeopteryx. You can see very clear flight feathers. But in addition, you can see a bony tail that also had feathers on it. And the skull looks not kind of like a bird, but not completely. But you can see if this was the only feathered fossil that we knew of, there were no precursors in the fossil record. And in fact, when this was first discovered, there was a lot of thought that this was a hoax, that this couldn't be real. Over here on the right is a reconstruction. So Nobu Tamuru is a fantastic paleo artist. He's one of the best in the business. And so they draw what they think these ancestral fossilized organisms looked like. We don't have great evidence of colors, but we do have some evidence of colors. And so we do think that Archaeopteryx was a very dark colored bird. Some pigments seem to preserve and others seem not to preserve. So we're limited in what kinds of colors that we can see based on the fossil record. But in the 1990s, a major new collection, so a whole bunch of new fossils started to be found in China. And we start seeing pre-Archaeopteryx fossils with feathers. Is Archaeopteryx considered a bird? Great question, Anna. Not usually, because it had the bony tail and it had teeth. And in our modern definition of birds, birds don't have teeth. So there's also the fact that as far as we can tell, it's kind of a dead end line. So it's a theropod. It's a theropod dinosaur, but we don't think it's ancestral to modern birds. So we don't consider it a bird. Even though if we saw it today, until we saw the teeth, we would go bird. It shows you once again that biology doesn't put things in the nice, neat little compartments that humans like to. We want everything to fit in a nice box, and it just doesn't work that way in the real world. Okay, so these feathers that we start seeing in these earlier fossils that began to show up in the late 90s didn't just show fully mature feathers like what we saw in Archaeopteryx, but also some of these downy-like feathers or the plume-like feathers that we see on modern-day ratites that don't have a lot of structure to them, as well as some things that look kind of like pin feathers, but not as tightly wrapped permanently. So, you know, when you think of pin feathers, they've got that sheath around them. These didn't really have that sheath, but they were still just kind of a straight, relatively short, almost fur looking, but not quite. If you look at them under the microscope, they don't look like fur. They look like more like ray-type feathers. So clearly, feathers had to evolve before birds were fully evolved. And we see, especially these very, very early, almost hair-like feathers in lots of theropod fossils. But of course, it's more complicated than that. We see in some species where we have lots of representative fossils, the juveniles had feathers, but the large adults did not, suggesting that the feathers were important for keeping warm, maintaining that body temperature, thermoregulation in the young, but then the adults got big enough they didn't need feathers anymore. And a lot of species had both feathers and scales. Like modern birds, they have feathers, but they have scales on their legs. Some dinosaurs, we have no evidence of feathers or fur or anything like that. But if we have skin impressions, we see scales, like what we see on modern reptiles. So we do have some dinosaurs that were probably very scaly. But the fact is, softer tissues do not preserve as well as bone and teeth especially. So we don't necessarily know for a lot of species if they had scales, if they had feathers, if they had both. Most of the time when we do have a skin impression, it's only from part of the body, so it's not the entire body. So we may know that they had scales on their legs, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have like a feathery crest to try and attract the mates, you know, for display purposes or something. Okay. So we know that feathers predated birds. We know that bipedalism predated birds. What else do we know? During the 1990s, again, the 1990s were a great time for paleontology because before that time period, it was generally believed that the only thing that was preserved in a fossil were the bones, and that soft tissues just did not preserve. And in the 90s, we start finding soft tissues that are preserved, usually in a different way than the way bones are preserved. And we started recognizing that we could find impressions in the surrounding matrix, the bone around the stone around the fossil bones. We could sometimes see things like skin impressions or blood vessel impressions. And so in the 1990 in South Dakota, a dinosaur was being excavated that had a strange rock inside its chest cavity. The rock was largely iron, and iron is not found in high quantities in the bones around this area. So the person who saw this realized that it might be something new, realized that it might be something exciting, and included this iron-rich structure with a bunch of rock and excavated the whole thing and took it back to the labs. They did CAT scans of this block of rock to better see this iron structure. And they found something that was distorted, but was a clearly identifiable part. And so here it is. Now, it's not complete, but we can see the major structures here. This, yes, it is super cool. This is one of the atria. And here are the two ventricles. And there was enough distorted material to see that there was a second atria here. So it was a 4-chambered heart. So exciting when this was discovered. I mean, blew the paleontology world apart. Before this was discovered, oh, dinosaurs are cold-blooded, they're lethargic, they're not very active. All of a sudden, we have a 4-chambered heart. 4-chambered hearts are found in birds, crocodiles, and mammals. Things like the reptiles that are not birds or crocodiles have 3-chambered hearts. Amphibians and fish. Amphibians can be 2 or 3. Fish, it's largely 2. So what we know about dinosaurs, based on the fact that they had a 4-chambered heart, they had to have been more active. They were probably able to raise their body temperature, so that's endothermic or warm-blooded. And they probably were, I already said, very active, because the 4-chambered heart allows you to have more oxygen in the blood supply to your tissues. The more oxygen being supplied to your tissues means you can do more energy production. You get more energy from a bite of food if you breathe oxygen. If you have high amounts of oxygen in your bloodstream. If you have lower amounts of oxygen in your bloodstream, like you're a lizard, you're not able to extract as much nutrients from the food. You're not able to get as much energy. So this is really strong evidence. What's even more surprising is, despite this cute little cartoon over here, this fossil heart was not found in the theropod lineage. It was not found in a T-Rex or a raptor. It was found in a separate line of dinosaurs that split from the line leading to the theropods before the theropods started to evolve during the middle of the Triassic period. Remember, the theropods show up towards the end of the Triassic period. So this is millions of years older than theropods, which is strong evidence that probably everything that we have uncovered that fits into the dinosaur category were warm-blooded. Certainly, there's strong evidence that all of the theropods were able to maintain a relatively constant internal body temperature to some degree. Now, I do want to point this out. I like this image because we have dinosaurs in pop culture. We have images that I'm showing you that are best estimates of what they looked like. We're probably way off. If you look at this image, you can see the skeleton of this secretary bird. Now, what's not preserved, or what would not be preserved, is this thick muscular area through here. We would probably draw this, and I'm going to try and draw this really badly. We would probably draw something that had a scrawny neck, more like a swan's neck. And then we have no idea about the tail. And then we would probably draw something that came up like this. But we would not know anything about the head ornamentation, right? That's not likely to be something we preserved. So it can be very confusing, and we can be very inaccurate when we do these representations. So I want to talk specifically about the furcula or wishbone. So we know the furcula is very important for flight. If you remember, there's the furcula kind of acts kind of as a energy storing spring that reduces the amount of energy a bird needs to lift their wings back up after a downstroke. The furcula existed in theropods before wings. So back when theropods were these, T-Rex kind of things with short front legs, we think that the furcula originally evolved to help strengthen the shoulder region. And that was because we think theropods used their front legs to grasp struggling prey. This provides additional force for the muscle contractions and, like I said, strength for those joints so they're less likely to get injured. All of this evidence is suggesting that theropods tackled relatively large prey items. So they weren't going out there, T-Rex wasn't going around and eating a bunch of rabbit-sized dinosaurs. It was probably going and eating something the size of, trying to eat something the size of an elephant. And it was asked earlier about Archaeopteryx. I've got in my notes to say right here, there's not a nice dividing line between the theropods and the modern birds. Biology does not work that way. We do see gradual changes in the fossil record that help show this evolutionary process. And I apologize, Archaeopteryx was not on the line leading to birds, but you get the idea. Probably the most important evolutionary change was the shrinking body size. And actually, somehow, I'm supposed to be on this slide. So when we look at the evolution of the birds, the theropods tended to be, as I mentioned earlier, slightly larger, 100 to 500 pounds. Birds nowadays are much, much smaller than that. So the ancestors of our of modern day birds, the specific theropods started to be called paraves. And paraves were the theropods that were starting to shrink. They were starting to get smaller. And once these started shrinking, the rate of evolution started increasing. So we start seeing more bird species, more diversity. Oh, well, okay, paraves, more paraves species, more diversity in paraves. And one of the things that we think was going on is once they got small enough, they started to be able to fly. So we're pretty sure Archaeopteryx could fly. Flight is very energetically expensive. We know that. Being small allowed for birds to fly, and flight allowed birds to expand into unoccupied ecological niches. A niche is a scientific way of saying everything about how this species lived. So a niche, my niche would be my job. It would be the food I eat. It would be the water I drink. It would be the house I live in, the clothes I wear, how I get from work to my job. Great thing about teaching like this is the commute to work is very, very easy. But everything about how you live is your niche. And so there weren't flying vertebrate animals. So there were flying insects, yes, but there weren't there weren't bats, there weren't birds. So as soon as these paraves began to fly, it opened up a whole new part of the planet. They could fly into trees. They could avoid predators. They could nest in the trees. Nesting in the trees is going to reduce predation on your offspring. They could catch flying insects on the wing, something that couldn't have happened before. They could move over larger distances. So if you think about a sparrow can fly incredibly long distances. You know, a mile is nothing to a sparrow. But if we try and compare that to a mouse, a mile is a long way for a mouse to go. They're not likely to travel that far if they don't need to. So having a larger home range helped these species to thrive. We did not see other lineages of dinosaurs shrink. So it was only the paraves. And we think that this smaller size helped with survival in the big post-dinosaur extinction event. It was originally called the KT extinction. Now it's being called KPG. K is for Cretaceous. It's spelled with a K in German. And PG is Paleogene. So this is the extinction event where a large asteroid, probably 6 to 9 miles wide, so really, really massive. It struck what is now known as the Yucatan Peninsula and caused the mass extinction of about 75% of the species on Earth. 75% of all species went extinct shortly after the asteroid hit. Smaller animals and scavengers survived at higher rates. And those that survived were then able to evolve into the modern diversity of life. And this is the KT extinction event. See this pale band? That is a band of rock that is rich in iridium, and it can be found everywhere on the entire planet. If you find the rocks that are this age, you are going to find an iridium-rich band. And the rock that's laid down next is this black band. I haven't heard exactly what's in this black band. I've tried to figure it out. I have my own hypothesis, and I think that this is probably a lot of compressed dead plant matter from the extinction event. So this is a lot of the extinction of the plants, because we think when the asteroid hit, the skies got filled with debris and things, there wasn't enough sunlight coming in, and it was probably a lot cooler than it used to be. So, isn't that amazing that this mass extinction event, this asteroid impact, can be seen anywhere on the planet? But it does kind of ruin the plot of one of the Avengers movies, where Loki is trying to get a source of iridium and has to break in somewhere, and there. Iridium's common if you can just find this layer of Earth. Okay. So that is wrapping up evolution. Do you guys have any questions on that? Nope, no questions. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start the next topic. And our next topic is genetics. So I know somebody's going to miss this. Talking about last class that they were talking about liking genetics. So I hope you're watching the video because we're starting our genetics conversation now. So what is genetics? Genetics is the study of inheritance, of traits. So I'm going to use the term traits or characteristics a lot. And this is a very broad term that just covers everything about an individual, both the physical appearance, the external appearance of an individual, as well as a lot of internal stuff. So when we talk about this, we think of the outside appearance. It's easy to see, but it can also be things like the shape of the keel. How big is that forward projection of the keel? The size of the crop. Crops are really big in parrots, not so big in a lot of other birds, like these lovebirds here. How the digestive enzymes work, the immune system functions. So anything that can vary between individuals, we're talking about the genetics of. And we also need to look at how genes are passed from parent to offspring. So these two guys here on the left are peach-faced lovebirds. Peach-faced lovebirds do exist in the wild, and they look basically like this. This is how they're colored in the wild. Over here on the right are also some peach-faced lovebirds. You are not going to find these yellow or blue lovebirds in the wild. Those are colors that would be harmful to the individuals. They probably would not survive if the mutation occurred, if the change in the genes occurred. But we can breed birds specifically for looking for this kind of things. Importantly, the only traits that we're talking about with genetics are those that are coded for in the genes. So you cannot pass other traits on to your offspring, things that you have acquired over your lifetime. So we've seen pictures of birds that only have one leg. They can survive in the wild. They can reproduce. Their offspring are not going to be born with one leg. There was almost certainly some kind of injury that happened that made that bird lose its leg. That is not in the genes. It's not getting passed on. Genetics is important if you ever want to breed. And it doesn't matter if you're breeding birds, if you're breeding reptiles like snakes and lizards, if you're breeding dogs or cats, anything that you want to breed, fish, we should have a basic understanding of genetics. And if you do want to breed, there's probably a lot of good information out there on the specifics of the species you're looking for. So if you want to breed specific colors of lovebirds, there's information out there that will help you determine what color the parents should be. If you want a good singing canary, you get parents that are good singers. If you want fast, accurate homing pigeons, you can pick out the fastest, most accurate homing pigeons, breed them together, and keep doing that until you get faster offspring. You also need to look for genetic diseases or increased risks for certain conditions in the genes. So it's not just the good stuff that you need to worry about with breeding, it's the bad stuff too. So cockatiels have a genetic condition that results in slow growth. So they mature slowly. They tend to have liver problems and a very, very bad, weak immune system. These are sometimes called 1-week cockatiels because they tend to survive. They get to the pet store, and about a week later, they start dying. So if this is happening in your cockatiels, you shouldn't be breeding those parents together anymore. Canaries have a genetic condition that leads to baldness in the males and abnormally formed feathers that form cysts. And budgies can be at higher risk for certain cancers. It tends to run in families. A family where a lot of the budgies get cancer has some genetic mutation that increases their risk for cancer. It's the same thing in people. If your parents and your aunts and uncles and your older siblings all have diseases, if there's a lot of cancer running in your family or a lot of heart disease, you're going to be at higher risk. It's the same for animals. So what is a gene? I'm batting this word around. I haven't defined it. Genes are instructions. So the genes have a code that instructs the cell on how to make proteins. Proteins, if you've learned some nutrition, protein and nutrition is the same as protein here. Proteins do a lot of things in the body. In fact, most of the things that get done in the body, not necessarily things that are made, but the activity of the cells, the contractions of the muscles, all of that, most of that involves proteins. So your genes say what proteins are going to be made, what is going to be the shape of those proteins, and the shape of those proteins determines their function. Just like the shape of tools determines what they're good for. You can't use a hammer to saw wood. If you make a protein of a specific shape, it's going to have one job that it's capable of doing. When we talk about proteins and the different shapes, some proteins form pigments, and different pigments have different colors. We're going to use colors a lot in our discussion of genetics because it's easy to see these. But genetics is also involved in where things are produced. Pigments, we want those to be produced in feathers. So the proteins that put pigments in feathers should be active in the skin. not in the digestive tract. You don't want to grow feathers in your digestive tract. Genetics helps determine that. And the genes are found on chromosomes. So these are 2 fake chromosomes. In vertebrate animals, we all have 2 copies of each chromosome. Our chromosomes are named by number. And so if we have 2 copies, so if we have 2 copies of chromosome, let's say chromosome 3, each copy of that chromosome 3 is going to have the same genes. So we can look at that here. These, let's call these chromosome 3. Each one has a gene involved in temperature regulation, a gene involved in eye color, a gene involved in fur texture, a gene involved in production of nails, a gene involved in production of fur. Where on the body is the fur? Now, we can also see that the different the genes on the different chromosome can come in varieties. And these varieties are called alleles. And again, let's look at this. Gene for eye color. It's color coded on this one. So this gene has the allele to make blue eyes. This one has the allele to make brown eyes. The fur texture gene is different, slightly different colors here, but the gene for temperature regulation is going to be the same gene or the same allele. When we were talking, I think last time, we were looking at an image where there was a change in a pigment, a feather pigment color. So we had a feather pigment in the ancestral canaries that had an allele to make yellow pigment. And at some point it mutated, and the offspring now started having a new allele. It takes genetic mutations to make a new allele, and that new allele made red pigment. So now we have 2 different alleles in canaries, one for yellow pigment and one for red pigment. When we have 2 alleles that are the same, we call that homozygous. Homo means the same. If the alleles are different, we call that heterozygous. Hetero means different. We use these terms in our life today. We talk about people who are homosexual or heterosexual. Homo is the same, hetero is different. Anytime you see that in a scientific word. How's everybody doing right now? I'm missing Ronit today. Okay, thank you, Daniel. So this is an electron micrograph image. These are both electron micrograph image of bird chromosomes. I'm pretty sure these are chicken chromosomes. No, they're not. I'm not sure what they are. But they are bird chromosomes. Actually, no, they're not. They're from a mammal. Sorry. I tried to find bird chromosomes, but bird chromosomes look the same. It doesn't matter. This image on the left, somebody has gone through an electron micrograph image and basically photoshopped so that both copies of chromosome 1 are together, both copies of chromosome 2 are together, both copies of chromosome 3 are together, and they're in size order. Notice number 1 is the largest, and in this instance, number 36 is the smallest. This is always the case. The largest chromosome is always going to be number 1. The second largest chromosome is going to be number 2. The third is going to be number 3. Doesn't matter what species we're talking about. The image on the right is also an image of chromosomes, but this is an image where they've done some staining, but what I wanted to show you is that they're not organized like this in the cell. They're organized kind of like this in the cell. So it's not like the 2 copies of the chromosome, whichever one this one is, maybe 16 or 17, they're not next to each other in the cell, except during cell division. So the number of chromosomes varies between species. So not every species has the same number. Birds tend to have a large number of chromosomes. So chickens have 39 pairs. So that means they would have 39 pairs lined up like this. This is 37 pairs here. So 36 plus XX. Or a total of 78 separate chromosomes. In mammals, the X chromosomes are X and Y. They don't have a number. We call them X and Y because they're involved in determining what sex we're going to be. In vertebrates, offspring get 1 copy of each chromosome from the father. The other copy comes from the mother. Now, it is completely random which chromosome ends up in the sperm or the egg that eventually becomes the new individual. So if we look at our image here, let's say this copy of chromosome 1, this individual inherited from their grandparent, their grandmother. The other copy came from their grandfather. There is a 50% chance the copy I circled in red that copy, we'll just say from your mother, is the one that gets passed on. 50% chance. There's a 50% chance the other copy, the copy that you got from your father, will get passed on to your offspring. And it's completely random how many of the chromosomes you got from your mother will be passed on to your offspring versus how many you got from your father. Okay, so there's a lot of diversity in which chromosomes end up in a sperm or an egg. You guys following that? This is one of the things some students have trouble with. So what I've got here is 2 lovebirds, and we're looking at a single gene. This gene is either green, which is wild type, the way the wild birds look like, or pied. Pied means patches of yellow and green in this particular one. So the phenotype is the physical appearance of the genes, the specific alleles present in that individual. So the phenotype here is green, and the phenotype here is pied. We can also talk about the genotype, and the genotype is naming the specific alleles. So the green wild type bird, for this gene, we're calling this lowercase g. I'll explain why we're calling it lowercase later, even though this image has a capital G. Don't worry about that part, but we're calling this one GG. The pied we call GP. So that says this individual is homozygous for the green allele. This bird is homozygous for the pied allele. Okay. And I think I'm going to stop here. We're going to come back. I'm going to repeat this part to make sure we all understand it on Tuesday. But I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of genetics right now with 3 minutes left in class. So does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about today? Man, you guys have been quiet today, quieter than normal. All right.
Well, I just have my mic muted because most of the time my dog was in the background barking. So I just had to talk. Like unlike last Tuesday, he decided to bark randomly, so which I'm sorry about. He's the skittish one, and like everything he sees, he has to bark at. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna mute myself today.
Oh, and Jessica says it's rainy weather. Yeah, that'll do it too. Hi, Kinley's cat.
As I say, excuse my cat that decided to rock right in front of you. What are you doing, baby?
We always like cats in Zoom calls.
She's actually really pretty too.
She is a pretty one. Oh, and Daniel says he's got a 5-month-old. Puppies are challenging.
Oh no, this one's not.
They are.
He's just challenging in general. He's more like 5 years old, but acts like 2-year-old, but then 2-year-old that's scared of his own shadow.
Oh, great. All right. Well, everybody have a good weekend this weekend, and I will see you guys.
I'm gonna have a great weekend. Actually, if you're gonna watch the Bruins game, you should watch it this weekend because I'm going.
Oh, have fun then.
And I'm going to PAX East. If anyone knows what that is, I'm going Friday. Friday and Saturday are my busy days. So I'm gonna try to get that homework in, but it's probably gonna be Sunday. So I'm gonna be exhausted this week.
Okay. And Jessica's taking a puppy to class. Oh, have fun, Jessica, and I'll
Have fun,
see
Jessica.
everybody else
All right,
next
take
week.
care.